prior to becoming a member of the European Parliament, I was a really successful lawyer in the City of London. I was one of the leading financial services lawyers out there. I was told I will never work in the city again because of my campaigning for Brexit. I have only ever had one or two proper legal jobs since 2019. I've even been granted the opportunity to go to a chambers. I was coming in on a train to do my first day, and they got a call saying various black members of chambers had said they would not work for me, so they had to renege their offer. And their view was, my views on immigration were a persona non grata as far as they were concerned. And obviously needs must. We've all got to live.
Survive.
I have to survive. I had a 3-year-old daughter at the time when I was in the European Parliament. She's 12 now. Sorry, I don't know why I'm getting emotional about that. What they did was try to destroy the family unit.
Hello and welcome to the Resistance GP podcast. My name is Will Coleshill at Will Coleshill on X, and today I'm joined by former MEP, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Steven Woolfe.
Hey, good afternoon, Will. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Welcome. So, do you want to tell people where they'll know you from?
Well, I suppose most people, if they know me at all, if I've not faded out of the kind of political atmosphere and views of people, was when I was a member of the European Parliament for UKIP, elected in 2014, but prior to that, joining them in 2010. So I kind of rose quickly on the national executive, got onto the list of campaigning in general elections and the City of London in terms of the mayoral elections. And then through that, I, in 2014, became the immigration spokesman for UKIP at that time. I remember an interesting kind of meeting with Nigel in Strasbourg where he said, Stephen, along with, I think Patrick O'Flynn was there and Tim Aker, who were also MEPs. And they said, Stephen, I want you to be the kind of immigration spokesman for UKIP. And I immediately said, no, I won't do that. Clearly, because I was the only mixed-race member of the team on that, there was a clear view that, let's bring the immigration portfolio to someone mixed race. That's fine. That wasn't the reason. It's because I felt straight away that even the use of the word immigration was actually too narrow. And so I said, okay, if you want me to do it, I'll be the migration spokesman. But the first thing you've got to do is stop calling Romanians and Bulgarians out as criminals all the time because, quite frankly, not every Romanian, not every Bulgarian is a criminal. And how would you like it if your boyfriend or girlfriend was that? And you thought that everyone was the case. Let's be specific, let's deal with numbers, and let's deal with facts. And if we get that, we'll win the argument along that way. So that's where I got into it. I think the defining moment for me was very quickly people saw me as the person to take over UKIP, and a really kind of virulent, nasty campaign was taken against me in 2016 after Nigel had lost. First of all, the party itself said that I hadn't even put my application in on time, despite the fact it was there on the screen, and I was talking to the chairman of the party as I'm saying, for some reason it's not going through, there seems to be a block on this coming through. I press a button, it says send, it's not working, why not? Anyway, we now know that it was blocked in a server in the US, but there we go, that's a different issue. So they stopped it. And then I think the infamy occurred with the attack on me by Mike Hookham in the European Parliament in 2016 that led to me having 2 seizures in the European Parliament, one for a minute and a half, one for a couple of minutes longer. French MEP rushing out, pulling my tongue out of the back of my throat, which would have ended me there and then. I'd have been in hospital, and that was the end of me being in UKIP in 16, and I became independent. And I did work independently from there. We obviously campaigned excessively hard during the referendum campaign. I drafted a Leave Means Leave paper on a fair, flexible, forward-thinking immigration. So I'd done UKIP's policy, I'd done Leave Means Leave, fair, flexible, forward-thinking immigration policy way back, as I said, in kind of 16, which showed after Brexit we could actually have a really thriving economy with just a net migration of 50,000. Some of the ideas in there were taken on by the Conservative government at the time, including my view from Migration Advisory Committee.
This podcast is able to happen thanks to NutriHealth 365 vitamins. For information on how vitamin D crucially supports your immune system, click the link below. More on NutriHealth later.
As a consequence of that, I decided that although I wasn't in frontline politics, I was still very supportive of Brexit, clearly. That's what the people have elected me for. And I carried on in the European Parliament for 3 years doing that, campaigning up and down the country. I campaigned for Alfie Evans to try and save his life in the Liverpool hospital when the hospital was determined to kill him. I campaigned for servicemen who are being arrested and charged time and time again by the MOD over past cases. But the reality was I started to specialise in immigration. And I thought that one of the best things to do is just to create the Centre for Migration, which I did, and produce numbers, produce hardcore numbers. So the numbers of people coming into the country, population, asylum numbers. Let's look at the boats coming over when it started in 2018. Let's look at the numbers of deportations or removals, as we call them. Let's look at the numbers of people who were or are being granted permanent right to remain. Let's look at the law around it, the ECHR, the HR, the international covenants and agreements that we've signed. So that was the basis of it. And when you start, I thought initially, let's just deal with the economic arguments. And my God, it's like I remember getting a couple of the team in Brussels, and I said, let's start pulling up all the literature that we've got on the economic arguments about it, whether immigration is good or immigration bad, what sectors and all the rest of it. And literally I filled about 6 files, which I still have in one of my, in a kind of box in part of my shed.
And this is you doing all this mostly off your own back?
Mostly off my own back.
Next to no funding? Next
to no funding. I never really... I thought it would be easy to go out and raise funding. I didn't really have the skills and knowledge how to go about raising funding. And I thought, okay, I'm coming to 2019. Maybe I can run this as like a hobby, and then I'll get back into work. Because prior to becoming a kind of member of the European Parliament, I was a really successful lawyer in the City of London. I was one of the leading financial services lawyers out there. I drafted the global market conduct policy for Barclays Capital after they'd been fined, I think it was £250 million by the US and 32 other massive global conduct policies. I chaired the Hedge and Lawyers Association. I was well known. And I thought, okay, that'll be a great job. I've set up the structures, the website, the details, the branding, how we can communicate to journalists. And I can use some of that money that I will make back in the city for the greater good and be able to employ people that could help me do the research, or someone had a bit more technical skills on drafting, something on Canva or using greater things than me. In the end, it didn't happen because I was blackballed. Immediately I was told I will never work in the city again because of my campaigning for Brexit. And I was immediately told I would find it very difficult to get a lawyer's job, and that's exactly what's happened to me. I have only ever had 1 or 2 proper legal jobs since 2019. I've even been granted the opportunity to go to a chambers. The head of chambers was perfectly affable, a Remainer. A young lad who did a young chap, so I'd probably offended if I said young lad, but he was a really lovely man who was young, energetic, doing criminal law, and a really energetic and vibrant young lady who was doing family law, all in a set of chambers, all Remainers, and all understood that the clerk of the chambers liked the work that I could do. I'd come with good references. They gave me a job to work in that chambers, and about 2 or 3 weeks later I was coming in on a train to do my first day. And they got a call saying various black members of chambers had said they would not work for me, so they had to renege their offer. And their view was, my views on immigration were a persona non grata as far as they were concerned. And when we looked on the website, I looked at the articles they were talking about. This was basically statements about removing the European Court of Human Rights from our system, the HR, things that are not controversial in some circles today, but that is part of the left and their egregious way of ensuring that people can't get even a job in an area that they do. So essentially, I've kind of done like the media work. I've done the Centre for Migration, getting little bits here and there. And then I was told very clearly, this is way back just, after COVID, which was a disastrous time for lots of particular reasons for me and for many, many hundreds of thousands of people in the country. I think I had something like 100,000 followers across all the spectrums. And they said, Stephen, if you want to get work, you've got to lose the lot. So we then spent 6 months employing people to scrub me from the web. And it worked. Pretty soon after that, I got a job. I literally could have changed my name. Is the only way that I could have got a working job. And a friend of mine who's a very good kind of advocate for freedom in the United States, her and her husband are longtime friends, raised huge amounts of money for Trump. He was imprisoned for 3 months for fundraising for Trump, part of the campaign by Biden. And as he came out of prison, he said, Stephen, if I can survive prison for my beliefs, then you should get back in the game a little bit. And I suppose in December, I set off again on a more proactive way of promoting what I was doing before. And I've started to look at all my documents, the research, pulling out the papers. And I looked at it over the last week and we went, my partner, she said, my God, that's a huge, huge body of work. How could you let that go? And obviously needs must. We've all got to live.
Survive.
I have to survive. I had a 3-year-old daughter at the time when I was in the European Parliament. She's 12 now. Sorry, I don't know why I'm getting emotional about that. But yeah.
It's difficult.
It's shit. It was absolutely shit, if you don't mind me swearing. What they did was try to destroy the family unit. And I fought through it. Because a number of factors. One is I didn't want my daughter to know defeat. Don't let them grind you down. And it was hard. So we fought back. And I'm not going to let them defeat me this time again. I'm not going to actually renege on the values that I stood for. I stood up, just like my grandfather did in the Second World War, against a heinous individual. And he stood up like millions of others stood up. And they stood up and risked their lives. They watched people die next to them. And all I did was stand up and try and claim that we should leave the European Union and use the democratic scenarios of our country, the democratic frameworks. And I don't believe I should have been cancelled, nor any of the others being cancelled. And I think the strength of seeing my daughter turning to the brilliant person that she is today, that's what kept me on the straight and narrow. That's what kept me on the framework. Any father will tell you, any mother will tell you, that you get enormous strength from your children if you want to defend and look after them, and you will do anything, whatever job it came along. And I have done some fascinating jobs just to make ends meet along the way. But it was ultimately herself who said, and this was, oh God, what was it? We were watching, it's a brilliant Netflix program about a kind of Mexican lawyer in a Cadillac. I think it was based on a John Grisham book. And she said, Dad, you're a great lawyer. People have always said you're a great lawyer. Why don't you just get back into it? And I said, well, look, I'm 57 now. No one's going to take you. And she turned to me and went, you've always taught me never to give up, never to let them beat you. Always pursue your own dreams and values. And it was really weird hearing your daughter tell you the advice that I've given hundreds of young men and young women, that don't let the authorities or states grind you down. Keep persisting. And then suddenly realised I'd allowed it to happen to me. So that's why in December I got back on the horse, and here I am, putting out data on a regular basis, getting out on there. And, I've got thanks to that in terms of what happened, my daughter, my friends. And it's a much better place suddenly being honest with yourself. And that is, I think, one of the difficulties when you look at politics is seeing that a lot of people are just not honest with themselves. I'm sorry, I've always been a little bit emotional. I think Farage once told me, he said, you should stop bloody crying, you whinger, or was it a weak whinger, I think he called me. But I can't help it, I can't help it. Life is tough for a lot of people in this country. And if you don't have any sense of empathy for them or what's happening to human beings, whether it's death, all the people that died in like COVID, and watching my neighbour who'd been married 62 years and she had to go to the end of her path to be able to see her husband just not be able to even touch the coffin. How can you not feel that kind of like emotional impact of what life and politicians and our elites do to individuals?
Well, you look at the number of girls who've been subject to the rape gangs, and you think every single one of those is a life that's been turned upside down. And you think about all the families around them.
Yes.
All of the future partners, the friends, family, it's going to ripple through everything.
It is a huge ripple. It's a disgrace. It's a stain on our society. And it's a stain bigger than anything that's ever happened in our country before, bigger than the so-called claims of abuse by the church in our country or anywhere else. It's bigger than the stain that we've got on other offences. And what's even more disgraceful, more disgusting, more just virulently immoral is the way that we're not having those in power, whether it's the civil servants in the councils, the officers that denied the opportunity for redress, the policy makers that ignored it. Why are they not fired? Why are they not being held to account? Why are they not turning around and saying, stop being a brown noser, because that's what you were. You allowed a child to be raped. You allowed a child to be abused. You would not want that on your own. And you are a disgrace, a disgusting human being for doing so. And I have no sympathy for them. I think, whether it's the woman that headed up the post office and allowed innocent people to go to prison and she's still there, wandering around, loving her life, no doubt, around the place. Why are we not kind of ignoring them? Some recompense. Okay, maybe people might say as a Catholic we should give them forgiveness. Yes. Okay, let's forgive once they've repented. Once they've come out and said, I am genuinely uneasy about what I did. I am genuinely apologetic. But I don't even see that. And I think they're just waiting for their pensions and their opportunity to get away and fade away into distance and say, it wasn't me, Governor. It was you. You were in the job.
Surely your God can forgive them, but I think the British people are angry and the British people want justice.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, justice is, whether you believe in a Catholic God or a Jewish God or a Christian God, there is a justice element in that. And that's why I said they must be held to account. You cannot seek forgiveness until you've been held accountable. And whether people want to see them imprisoned, and some of them may well, be liable for the negligence in a criminal offence to do so on that, or whether it is just that they just went along with it because, just like a Nazi, a civil servant, you ignored it and just put your stamp on the paper as the person was taken away to Auschwitz and burned. If you're one of them, because it's my job and that's what I needed to do, otherwise I'd lose my job or maybe I would actually also be put in there, then you too need to have a kind of judgment against you. And the public demand it, and it's righteous to have that kind of level of demand for some recompense. And the way that we still got politicians, whether it's Angela Rayner on the one side or, the minister who just on Question Time the other day said it was a dog whistle, they too cannot get it. They cannot get how low they've sunk to even make statements like that against children. Children. And there's no moral vacuum. And I think that's because in our country now, we've lost a moral vacuum. I think the left, and whether it's from Tony Blair in introducing a whole load of quangos and legislation, which on the whole may have initially meant well, but the way that it's just spread through our society has actually taken it the other way. We no longer have a system of morality for our laws, legislation, policy makers. It's all about covering up. And I think that is unacceptable.
So, given the fact that the government has committed a vast array of crimes, whether it's with these jabs, we've got electoral rigging, we've got the attacks on peaceful protests, we've got people being imprisoned for speech crime, we've got people being, stopped for carrying herbs. We've got a complete invasion of people's privacy. People are being given two-tier justice. There's two tiers within just about everything. You're being kept out of jobs. Where was your right to the Equality Act for your deeply held philosophical beliefs?
Well, that's my point. The point is the Equality Act was there initially to come into play as to say, yeah, let's be equal. Let's, someone is of colour like we are, you can get a job. And shouldn't just be denied it.
But some people are more equal than others.
That's where it's moved on to. That's what I'm saying. This is where the disgrace has occurred. You might start with a good idea, including the UN Convention on Refugees. We don't want to see people being murdered and bludgeoned in their country, as we saw in the Second World War. But look where it is now, that you can use that, plus legislation to say, if I don't like chicken McNuggets or my son doesn't, I'm not going to deport him, even though I committed a sexual offence. The point about where the left has gone and the continual addition, extraction, extension of what was normally a decent piece of legislation, although I wouldn't say that the Race and Relations Act in the way that it was drafted initially was completely decent. I think there was gaps in there to be able to have these extensions. But the way they've extended it is to allow the state to make the decisions over almost everything we do. No longer is your home your castle that you can actually defend. No longer could you have, in the words of many authors of the past, that you could go out and never meet a police officer and you could wander your life ignored. No. The state is in your face from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, from every time you leave the house, whether it's those opposing you on a council tax, gas, electricity, watching on the television, and what words you're allowed to hear, what views you're allowed to consume.
Take our guns, take our inheritance.
They do that, and the fact that we're now going to move into ID cards secretly, sneakily. Oh, let's go and put biometric ID cards on all those immigrants coming in just so that we can make sure that they've got a job. Well, we know where that's going. This is Tony Blair's lovely plan of making sure that we'll all have barcodes on our head eventually. We will monitor you. We see what you're doing. We know what you're doing. And I think where we kind of get it is, I'm a lover of history. I read an awful lot of it. And
you know how to make me smile.
Yeah, and at the moment I'm reading huge amounts about the kind of period pre and post.
English Civil War?
No, pre and post the Romans coming in. So we pretty know, 35,000 years ago, we've got people crossing over bits of land as it was, and it separated, and it came back, and it separated. But we did have what we called the kind of initial Celts, one of the three tribes that all left the central parts of the steppes. First set of Celts had all moved down towards Italy. The other Celts had gone up and become what eventually became the Angles and Saxons and Vikings, and a whole lot that came over to ours. Not as many, because of all the divide. And then some died, and it came back. So eventually we had some Celts. And then we started to get people coming across from Europe and became the Britons. And so those two combined themselves a little bit. One was more dominant than the others. Then the Romans came. And interesting, when we look at the Romans, there was a period where the Britons had their leaders, and many of them started to adopt the habits of the Romans.
They became Romanized.
They became Romanized. So we had Romano-Britons. I think we were watching Asterix the Gaul last night, my daughter and I. And Asterix the Gaul, I don't know if you've seen the new series. It's a 24 series. And in there they have this kind of Gaul who wants to call himself a Romano Gaul or a Gallic Roman. And he's got pillars of Rome around his house, and he flattens anything that's, Gallic. And he dresses in a toga. And all the Romans are looking at him going, a bit of an idiot, this one, but he's our idiot. We've always had those idiots, and we deal with it in governments across the world today. So, so you've got the Romans who look at him and go, he's one of us, but he is a bit stupid. And we had that. We had Romano-Britons in there. So you've now got like three groups in here. You've got the original Celts who became effectively the slaves. Britons who were slaves to the Romans, but also slaves to the Romano Britons. And then, of course, the Romans left. And after that period of time, as we know, that's when we had the variety of the Angles and the Saxons coming in, which formulated who we are today, the English. But the period that I'm looking at, whether it's through the chronicles and a variety others of material that it's really hard to actually try and get into the original document. A, because there's not a huge amount of it, but when you start reading it, it's fascinating. Is to see that the dominant culture of the Angles and the Saxons and the Farage that came over, it pushed all of those three groups further and further away. They moved up to Scotland, they moved up to Wales, they moved into Cornwall, some went over to Ireland. And
Brittany as well.
Yeah, and Brittany too. But those who kind of held on to the values of the Romans, their houses, their kind of like wanted to keep themselves with togas, ended up living in squalor as their places became more and more dismantled. But those at the bottom, the Celts and the Britons, still continued being the slaves. And what I'm seeing today is exactly that. You have this liberal elite who live in lovely houses in beautiful parts of England. And first of all, it was the European Union. They wanted to kind of sell themselves to that because they were the greater intellectual, emotional, cultural great gods of our time. And it kept them feeling safe. That's why Liberal Democrats vote as they do, because they're comfortable, they're well off, they live in nice houses, and they're hardly ever harmed by what goes on around them. But what they're seeing now is the poverty of mass immigration and the impacts on housing, schools, taxation, hospitals, road structures, our lands being dug up to put on wind farms and solar panels, because you've got this battle between the left, the battles between the Greenites and the battles between mass immigration, which is the impacts of population. I phrase it as population destruction caused by mass immigration. This is not about the individuals themselves, because you're going to find good people, but it's the cumulative effect of large numbers destroying what we know. And they are the Romano-Britons. They don't understand that they're the ones who are going to be pushed out into their little enclaves of nice parts of Hampshire, nice parts of Surrey, pushed down to their areas in Cornwall where they can live on their estates. But that will get smaller and smaller because the hordes, the Angles and Saxons, but of a different type nowadays, will actually come and dominate the cities.
And then eventually they'll be on their reservations. They'll be paying their Danegeld, and eventually one day they won't be able to pay it because it'll be too onerous.
And that's exactly it. And that's what I see is we're at that next stage of the population change in Britain. I think we're going to have, in the next census, a huge shock for people. I estimate that will be around 20 to 21% of this country will be foreign-born.
Well, you look at the birthing statistics, it's 1 in 4, isn't it?
I'm talking about just the foreign-born.
Wow.
I'm just foreign-born. I'm not including their children.
Oh, my God.
If you include their children, which aren't regarded as foreign-born, remember, in our statistics, we do not regard the children of foreign-born citizens as foreign-born children. We regard them as UK citizens.
Yeah, they're paper citizens.
Yeah. So when they come here, I think the numbers are going to be even huge. We've got currently like 500,000-600,000 children a year from foreign-born citizens as it is.
So what's the real number of migrants, actually including Axel Ruda-Cabana in those figures?
I think that's more difficult to tell because the government doesn't really produce the figures for us. But I would say that if you look in a population of roughly 70 million, which is where I think we really are, not the 60 odd that they're talking about, and you take about 15% of that as a conservative figure, because I always try and do the conservative figure, you're looking at 10.5, 11 million people here are foreign born. Then if you take over a 10-year period that you've got children added on, about 600,000 a year that are children to foreign-born citizens, you take 10 years, there's another 6. So add those two together and you've got about 17 million. That's why I'm saying that we've got roughly about 21% of our population by the time we have the next census will push us up to, I pretty much say about 17 to 20 million people in this country will be foreign-born or related to a foreign-born mother or father.
Are you subtracting the numbers that marry in and integrate?
No, I don't do someone like my mum with my dad in that sense. No, not at all. I'm just talking about the foreign-born citizens with their children. That's why I say it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's really hard because we don't have the statistics. The other
And you
statistics.
also don't know who's raising them.
No.
Because, for example, you could have an English father and a foreign mother.
Yes.
And the mother could go off with the child and they're raised as a complete foreigner.
That's right. So you don't have... The government has the stats. Trust me, the government has the stats.
Really?
Oh, they have the stats. They just don't produce it in the way that you want it. So I'll give you an example of that. When I started first thing looking at the numbers of asylum seekers that comes into this country, they produce a statistic, ASY underscore D01, I think it is, and then you've got ASY underscore D02 for those numbers who are being assessed for asylum. And there's a whole ASY underscore Ds that relate to different categorizations of the asylum journey. When you take out that first file, it comes out at around 187,000 lines of Excel spreadsheet. And literally, if you take it from the year 2000, which is where I did, it begins in 2000, January, Q1. So you have January, and then it has the country, and then it will do how many came over, and it didn't define them as male or female, just had a number. And just so it doesn't make it easy, the next one might be Afghanistan, the next one might be Bulgaria, the next one might be Algeria, the next one will be the United States. So you have to try and formulate an Excel spreadsheet to try and break it down by country, to try and break it down by age. And then you suddenly discover that children weren't included until 2009. Why? You knew who they were. You always have the children. And because the Home Office wants to not give you the full details at any one time, because if you have all the facts, it's easy to be able to produce the facts against them. So it took me over 100 hours just to produce several sheets that could break it down by country, by male and female and children. So I could look at unaccompanied children, so that I could give people the precise facts of the numbers who've come here when they do. Whether they came by boat, whether they came on rail, what quarter they came in. So that all these numbers, huge graphs, and eventually... I am now, someone said, go out and do a kind of fundraise, Stephen, to get someone to come and help you finish this. That's a mammoth piece of work that I've got. And I showed a few people recently and they were like, God, Stephen, that's huge with the graphics. But the key takeout is you can start to pull out the real numbers. So we've got 1.2 million people claimed asylum since the year 2000. 1.2 million since Tony Blair's time.
Well, I don't see many people being put to death in France, the Netherlands, or any neighbouring country, Iceland maybe.
No, it's 236 countries have claimed asylum in here. I've got some brilliant ones. I mean, one of my favourite is Svalbard. If anyone ever knows where Svalbard is, it's a little area just to the north of Norway. It's like a little district, a bit not quite like the Isle of Man, but, you know, it's up there. And someone from Svalbard claimed asylum. So I kind of wanted to know, what would it be like if you were actually questioning that person? So why have you come here and claimed asylum from Svalbard? It's fucking cold. The polar bear is looking at me every single day. I think he fancies me. I need to escape. I might be attacked by the polar bear. And I'm thinking, you know, Svalbard, it's cold. You could go to your own country. Why do you have to come to the UK? That's it. Or the other is like when Trump and Biden, and I think we had something like 84 escaped, applied for asylum from the United States under Trump and 64 under Biden, and he's kind of the first year of Biden, last year of Trump. And I kind of did this skit that said, and here we are, ladies and gentlemen, once again, Trump beats Biden on asylum applications to the United Kingdom. So it was like a little bit like that. But you see this kind of really weird numbers. France, Canada, Australia. Countries that are perfectly safe claiming asylum here in the United Kingdom. And there's no correlation, no link that says, here's Mr. X who arrived on this date. We've got the date he arrives. They put it in as January or whatever the date of the year is. He came by boat. He's a male. He's in the age. And then you get asylum numbers for claims and the decisions. But they don't tell you Mr. X. Did Mr. X claim asylum? Yes, you said he did. But when did he claim asylum and what was the decision to Mr. X? So you can't track it. So all you've got is broad numbers. You've got this data today that can't tell me that someone's just got off the boat on Calais, whatever his name is, He's claimed asylum, and you cannot track
The same person.
the same person
it's one
all the
code.
way through the process.
It's one code. That's all. It is.
Absolutely. You know,
One little line of computer code. You've got an identifier number. That's it.
Yes. Now, I'm not a computer genius. I mean, I have to admit, probably the reason why it's taken me 100 hours is because I need a computer genius who could turn around and say, yes, Stephen, you could have done that with Excel really, really quickly. Not the 100 hours you've done. But, you know, it is that simple to me. It seems very logical. And the only conclusion that you can draw from this is that the government is trying to hide the true numbers, or they're saying it's not cost effective. Well, I would turn around and say, okay, give me a coder, we'll put it in, and I'll track it for you. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who would do it for free to be able to follow it. But that is part of the obfuscation of government. Do not give the public the information they need. Make it work hard. Let us show that we are doing something, but make it too difficult for them actually to produce it.
Because if people knew the true numbers, then there would be riots.
That's right. This is our Reformation moment. This is sticking on the doors of a German church my statement against the Catholic Church. This is what's happened. And of course, they don't want revolution. That's why governments are always trying to protect themselves, and why you'll use your security services and the police, as you mentioned. They'll come out with putting people into organisations that are saying we want England for England, or those campaigns against the masked Antifa. You won't see them sitting in there in masked Antifa watching who they are, but you will get them undercover in organisations. You will then get the police in riot gear and already facing yourselves, but not facing those of Antifa that are sitting there in nice clean clothes. Why you get you're pulled out of that. That's the way they work, because they're frightened of the public creating, you know, a revolutionary moment, because we used to be quite a revolutionary people. We were a damned revolutionary people. The Levellers, the Diggers, the Pentridge Martyrs, from those who fought along in Wales, the Merthyr Tydfil riots that we had there. And we've always been brutalised. Just so I remember what happened at Peterloo. You know, they sent in the horses and killed children and women with their sabres. Their sabres were knives and swords then. Today their sabres are NCHIs, or cancelling you from getting a job. They've learned that we don't need to stab you in the face or cut your head off. We just make sure that you can't work, or we imprison you for a tweet. That's the way we can control you now.
And it's the intimidation of seeing that it can happen to you.
Yes.
That then puts off other people.
Absolutely.
So I guess you need force of numbers.
You do.
And a broad front.
That's right. And that's why I think for a while I came to the conclusion that we needed a movement. You watch how movements successfully grow. Some more capable of achieving positive results. I mean, obviously there were movements like we saw in communism that didn't really result in some great results in Russia with 20 million dead. That's the negative side of a movement. What you saw in China is the negative side of a movement. And of course you might look at Chile and a similar sort of thing, although that really wasn't a movement. That was more a CIA operative action. So I think that if we had a movement that mirrored to a certain extent what happened in MAGA, which was successful, the movement that began in Italy with the 5-star movement that started the ideas of talking about things in Italy that they didn't want to talk about, and they grew, and of course they became integrated, as lots of Italian politicians do, but it led to the Northern League and others being able to continue that movement. I think if you have a movement that's broad-fronted, organised, structured, capable of taking on from the mass marches in London to the vocal on new media and social media, to challenge them in old media, to organisations that take people on in the courts, whether it's through the Free Speech Union or other organisations like Ofcom Watch, challenging them there, providing data, real data, so that people can have the facts. All of that built together creates a vocal voice that actually in many ways terrifies those in the elites, because that, in a sense, they see this as reform. Reform has grown politically. Yes, they're coming after him and Farage and that movement, but I actually also think that they think they can control him and manage him.
Can they? You know him.
Oh, I know Farage, yeah, absolutely.
Can they control him?
Yeah.
Or is he playing 5D chess? Because I interviewed his... You know Tony Brown?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Tony had worked for him in the European Parliament for like 20 years, I think.
Yeah.
Something
So
like that.
Tony was sat there where you were sitting, maybe in one of the other podcast rooms, but he said, trust Farage, he's being tactical, he has to play a very careful game. What do you say?
Well, I think Tony has been around and been well paid and looked after for Farage by being able to support him for a long period of time. And there are people that have been paid and by Farage's kind of mechanisms, whether it's in the European Parliament or outside of it. And they're true loyalists to him. But I think anyone in a political sense that has worked with him, as I have, and I think recently you've seen people like Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe, but all the way through, I've known Farage, yes, that he's looking to try and find the next angle in which, in my view, he can be the great deal maker and also promote himself. I think without a doubt, he is all about ensuring that his legacy in history is about his legacy in history. One of the weaknesses of Nigel is he used to say, I'm very clubbable. I'm a really clubbable man. The problem is he's not clubbable with the people he wants to be clubbable with. He wants to be clubbable with the elites.
He's trying to court the mainstream media
Always.
more than the alternative media, which I find interesting because he sits down with the people who lie,
Yeah.
who are part of a cartel that go around defaming the opposition. Like he would speak to Channel 4, for example,
Absolutely.
after all of that hit job in Clacton, after all of the lies that they told during the lockdown. They've done hit pieces against us, defamed us.
Yeah.
They're completely lying smear merchants. But he'll sit down with them rather than sit down with the alternative media, which I find strange.
Well, one of the reasons why he'll sit down with them is because he believes they still have greater reach into the area that he wants to get his electorate from, which is a kind of middle conservative ground that he wants to be able, the people who vote conservative for Hampshire and, Surrey and Kent and all those areas, and they still are watching Channel 4, they're still watching the BBC. So in that sense, I understand why he's doing that, because that's his political bag. But he's also very good at actually using the same journalists that criticise him to actually undermine the opponents within his own political party. Without a doubt, when hit jobs were done on me, I know that the journalists for Channel 4 were briefed and tipped off by UKIP senior people who were connected to Farage. They've admitted to me about it. They're very sorry about it. But sorry's too late. That's what they did. And we know that in the case of Rupert Lowe, that the journalists were being briefed by someone who worked very close to Farage. So he will work with them. He will work with them because he sees them useful in being able to get rid of people who rise to the top in his party, to ensure that those like, Brown and others know where their bread is buttered, keep saying Farage, keep promoting him, and I'll get the next lot, maybe an MP's role, to be honest. It's good. But the question is whether you think he really just genuinely believes in change for change's sake, whether he really wants to make the transformational change this country needs. And he's too closely associated with the need to be validated by the elites. He says he doesn't want to be a member of the House of Lords, but actually there are those who say that he was on the list 2 or 3 times and would have took it under a deal, with Boris. He'd love that. He's making...
I've heard from multiple people that it was the deal that he stood down and he took a seat in the House of Lords.
Yes, and he would love that, to be honest, because now he's made it. He's suddenly Lord Farage, and he's part of the same group of people that have ignored him and pilloried him from school. And he wants to be part of that club. He's very good at being able to talk to ordinary people in a sense, but he is not that clever, and there's enough people to understand that he really doesn't get the working class. He doesn't get the lower middle class either. He doesn't understand their struggles. He'll use the language of the white van man, the electrician, the plumber, and all the rest of it, but he doesn't really understand them. If he did, he'd understand why immigration was such a massive issue, and he needs to keep pushing it in the way that... And why does he need to be dragged kicking and screaming along the lines as he has done? recently.
The counter argument to that from Gawain Towler, from
Yeah.
Matt Goodwin, would be he's been one of the main campaigners against mass migration. He's got a proven track record with fighting to leave the EU.
Yes.
He's been in this for a long time.
Yes.
And they'd also say within our electoral system, there isn't a different option. And we have to focus on Farage and gamble.
Well, I agree with most of what they said. Yeah, the electoral system is very difficult and they want to gamble on Farage, but you're gambling on somebody, as I say, that I don't think really has the true push. Yeah, I mean, is he the sort of individual that could be like Trump, that could pull in Kennedy and, Stephen Miller to be able to draft the kind of documents? Would he be willing to share the limelight with all these great individuals that Trump has done, from Elon Musk downwards? And I don't think he can on that, because if you look what's around him, none of them have got the intellectual or political strength that these people who are surrounding Donald Trump have. You've got some interesting people who kind of understand some of the numbers, like Matt Goodwin, for example. But I don't think Matt Goodwin is a person that could push the door so harsh that he would challenge the civil service in such a way that, I'll kick them all out, I'll fire them all, let's use the ECHR, let's remove it. I don't see it as that sort of person. And there's nothing there in that intellectual strength that they have. And the right has people with strong characters capable of actually thinking these through and working it out. But he's not bringing them in because they would challenge him in his view. So you're sticking with somebody that in a way won't achieve it because you're doing a hope and a prayer.
And could balls up your one and only chance.
I can balls up the one and only chance, exactly that. And that's my concern about it. My deepest concern is that all these wonderful people that are working incredibly hard across the country have been elected on the dreams and hopes and aspirations that we can effectuate massive change through our councils, and that would lead us into Wales and do the same there, and then we can get a government that gets rid of a variety of quangos, get rid of the Race Relations Act, get rid of the ECHR. That's what they want, all this kind of legislative change. Do I intellectually think that they've got a team around him that are capable of doing that? Do I intellectually think that they've got a team that is carefully thinking through all the ramifications to do that? And at this moment in time, I don't believe they are. They say they're setting up some think tank and got some money to put into it. Maybe good. Perhaps I'll be proven wrong. Maybe they'll come out with a document like Douglas Carswell did recently in the press that said, let's use the Privy Council in lots of ways. But in order to get the Privy Council, you've got to get rid of everyone in the Privy Council and put people in the Privy Council that support what you do.
You've got to purge the entire government.
Yeah.
And all the civil
That's
service.
right.
You've got to purge the judges. You've got to purge
And
the schools, the
we
universities.
do not have the United States capability of purging. Whenever you lose a president in the United States, 15,000, 20,000 people lose their jobs. Out go the Democrats. All these jobs are suddenly filled by Republicans in the White House, in the government areas. There are a standing core of senior civil servants, and that's why Elon Musk was able to come in with his dog and say, you're gone. I'm getting rid of you. We can't get rid of half the people working in the cabinet office. We can't get rid of all the civil servants. There are ways, but you've got to utilize that through legislation in your hand, prepared on day one, put it in on the first night that you've arrived. Have that vote whilst you've got the mass votes that are on your hands before anyone can get in and do it, and vote the changes just to start dealing with the civil servants. So you can purge them. Once they're purged, that's going to lead to legal cases. Oh, employment law, you've changed it. Well, you've already done it in the first night of Great Repeal Act. You've removed certain rules of the employment law so they can't go into the common law. That's the sort of thing that if you want radical change, if you want this to be our Magna Carta, if you want it to be some sort of really reform act, you've got to have the people who are capable of doing that, and then you've got to have the majority.
And those people are radical, and you need them on board.
And you need them incredibly radical to do so. In the meantime, those radical people will be monitored by the police, monitored by the security services, monitored by the press, cut down at the knees. Some of them will be sliced off. They don't care. They'll bludgeon you along the way.
And that's where they don't rig the elections, of course.
Don't need to.
Well, they do already.
Well, not all the time. No,
But
I'm not going to go down the line that we're like America, where we've got mass rigging. There might be elements of that in certain towns and cities, but we're not anywhere near what happens to the US. They don't need to rig the elections in so many ways because they've already got what they need in the way that they established the constituencies to fit along their lines, which is why the Reform victories are quite a radical victory for them. You know, they're winning in areas where they've always said Labour would always win in these. Doesn't matter. We'll sort Labour up there. Tories down there. And now you've got this break where the people who were voting Tories are going, well, actually, I was always a Liberal. I'm going to vote for the Liberal Party, you know, because I'm comfortable in my nice house and I'm all right. And that is something that's more radical. I do accept that what we saw was one or two occasions, like the bundling of votes. And that I'm not sure whether it was Burnley, Rochdale, or whatever. I don't want to get down the line where we were in the view of saying areas that weren't true. And I have seen suddenly really weird voting patterns. I remember in Barnsley, when we went up there, and Barnsley was won by Labour, and it wasn't Jill Seymour, it was the Yorkshire lady for UKIP, nearly won there. And that did look a little odd. The voting pattern looked a little odd.
Think about if you got your first MP there. Think about the snowball effect that would have come after that. They don't need to necessarily rig every single vote, but if they can just stop the really important ones, just here, there.
Yep.
And I've been hearing stories, I've been hearing accusations. If they just get rid of the most notable, most outspoken members of Parliament in certain areas, the insurgents, they just stop them in their key constituency by enough votes to make sure that they can't have a recount, you lose momentum. You
do, and that's exactly one of the tactics that, again, as a person of history, you look about the way that the voting, whether it's the rotten boroughs, but also people suddenly started to vote differently. And all those that were shipped off to Australia were those who were radicals, who were starting to win in particular areas. The voice was being changed. The way that women, when they got the vote, so, you know, you forced them out of being able to be successful. And it took a long time, which is why I say we start, you know, perhaps pre-Magna Carta, perhaps it was like pre the Levellers. Maybe it was down to the Witan first of all. But I think the real momentum began with the Levellers and the Diggers, with the real pamphleteers getting out and getting that view out.
Oh, I prefer the Levellers over the Diggers.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying that they weren't, but I'm just saying at both that stage, that's where the radicalisation of the belief that the rule of law, the common law, the ordinary people having the vote, all the ideas. I mean, I've read a few of it's lovely. I'd love to be able to spend my time in Oxford's library and be able to see the originals of most of them that are there. And some are in the British Museum. You need special rights to go and see them. And actually do a book on all the Levellers pamphlets, because there's not actually a great deal that you can get off the web if you ever try and download it. And there are some books that show it, but
did you ever read Milton's Paradise Lost?
Yes, I didn't get to the end of it though, I have to admit,
because he writes Lucifer as a sympathetic character because of the fact that he's a rebel.
Right.
So it's not necessarily focused too much on the Luciferianism. He's still the bad guy. But in the aspect of being a rebel, he wanted to make it sympathetic. And there's a line, awake, arise, or forever be fallen.
Actually, that's a very good line. That's an incredibly good line. Because we need to be awake. We need to be arise. And that's what I mean about the movement that's needed now across the country. Otherwise, our nation is fallen.
Yeah, I mean, but just be careful using it, because everyone will accuse you of being a Luciferian. That's the problem.
I don't go out on a Friday night with a couple of red outfits and, you know, sit around the bars of Winchester going, hey, come on here. No, I actually, because I'm a wolf, I just wait for the moon and I become a vampire. That's, you know, a Wolverine. That's it.
You got silver bullet.
Yeah, that's right. And they could have got me that way.
Bag.
You know, don't need to get me any other way. That's it.
So, Farage, you say he can't be trusted.
I don't think he's got it. I think that's what Elon Musk said. My feeling is that he's worked hard. He's coming to the end. He wants a bit of cash. He wants his bit of influence. He wants his bit of history. But I don't think he's really got what it takes to push the kind of organisational structures of our state.
So what needs to happen instead? Because, like you said, there are a lot of radicals out there who want to fight back.
Well, you've either got two choices. Farage relents and understands that the talent that's out there across the country were people who are genuinely radical and becomes like Trump, forgives J.D. Vance and brings him in, understands what Kennedy is up to and brings him in, and understands that these people carry weight in their own communities within the movement, and looks at himself as a proper chief executive, where he is the vocal point, but he's got a number of really strong individuals that may be difficult to manage, may have egos, and by God, anyone who gets into senior levels of politics, of course they're going to have some form of egos. But they believe in what they want to do. And then you allow the funding and the structures in place to be able to build what's necessary. If he was capable of doing that, which might mean having to bring in people back like Rupert Lowe, or bring in back Ben Habib, bring in Andrew Bridgen, for example, on kind of healthcare now, particularly now that in the US, Andrew's kind of supporters are now have just been nominated to take up senior roles against COVID in the Trump and Kennedy kind of administrative areas.
Jay Bhattacharya.
Absolutely.
Jay Barrington Declaration.
Yeah, absolutely, they are.
It's all coming out in September, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've all... So you've got these individuals that you can pick up across the country who've got strength, character, capability.
David Curtin.
Yeah, one of those. You could do it, and bring in people that... I think are radical enough, on a different side. Emma Ware, Peter Whistle, there's a whole variety of individuals across the spectrum, and work on it properly and say, okay, I understand where it's going. If he could do that, I think he's got the framework to be able to achieve it. If he doesn't, then I sense one or two things is going to happen, and I'm reading between the lines and looking at what everybody is talking about in the background, is that Ben and Rupert are going to either launch a new movement or a new party. My preference would be a movement, I have to admit, because I think a movement can create the structures of a political party. You could have an organisation team at the top that looks at councillors across the country, and if they're independent and they comply with what we want as a vision, then we support them through financial or voices or boots on the ground, whilst building a mass movement that is capable of demonstrations across the country. The voices through, like yourself and all those who are doing podcasting, the alternative media, infiltrating into the general media and having the voices there because they're recognised and capable of dealing with the nasty questions and the way that they will hit you, to organisations that challenge different structures of society and build the legislative framework. I think that, with the capability of having a political movement, should Farage fall.
Your body's immune system is under constant attack from flu, respiratory diseases and the common cold. And as we all know, vitamin D3 plays a vital role in maintaining a robust immune system. Now you can boost your immune system with Immune X365, our unique formulation that combines effective levels of vitamins D3, C and K2, as well as zinc and quercetin. This unique combination of nutrients in Immune X365 ensures maximum bioavailability of D3, thereby giving your immune system an optimum boost. Or try our new Immune X365 gummies, which are formulated specifically for children and young adults aged from 9 to 17 years old. Remember, all NutriHealth 365 orders come with free 2-day track delivery. Go to NutriHealth365.com to get your...
The problem is, you do talk about having independence, and fundamentally, the way this electoral system works is it absolutely shafts independence.
Of course it does.
So you would need a party branding, sure.
Yeah, no, I think...
the logo, and that's the factor.
Let me just think of the top of it. Let's call ourselves the Independence Alliance Movement. I am free. Sorry, there you go, a little hashtag I am free. I am independent. I don't know. It just comes off there. And let's say that you've got an independent running for a local council election somewhere who's just left Reform. Wants to convert from Reform because he's fed up or whatever they're doing. You've got that backing. I become part of the Independence Alliance movement. You can back independents, and there are numbers of independents across the country, but you give yourself the opportunity initially whilst watching whether Reform fails. If reform carries on being structured and sensible and managing to achieve the electoral goals it does, and actually is successful in the local authorities and what they want to achieve, then the movement's still there, still pushing out the message of what we need to do, backing those individuals where we need to, but Reform's gone and done it. That's fine. But if Reform starts to falter, if people start saying, we've got no support from the top in the councils, we've got 10 councils, there's no support. We've got all these councillors who are being now picked on, challenged, as they will do, as they did under UKIP, where Hope Not Hate are pursuing us, where the local Liberal Democrat Party are chasing us down, and they will be let go. They will be let go. We've heard the stories.
Smear pieces, everything in the media.
Yeah, that's
briefings
right. That's all of it. And they'll be let go. And if that happens, it's like what Alex Ferguson said, when he started building his team. Everybody hated Man United. But he used to lavish in the fact that everyone hated Man United. And even though there were some people in the team that were disruptive, he'd tell them off, but he wouldn't let them go until the right moment. He kept the team together. Under UKIP, under Reform, and we've already seen, under Brexit Party, and we've already seen under Reform, if anyone steps slightly out of line and is no longer looked upon as being conducive to the overall good of the party, it doesn't work well with a Hope Not Hate pursuit, we'll let you go. We don't care. We'll chop you off at the knees and off you go. Someone else will come in. There's no protective element of your team. And you need to wrap your arms around your team because the enemy is always going to be at your team. Now, occasionally, some members of that team, as we know in all teams, are just not good enough, may not be actually part of your team, maybe a plant. We get that, we understand that.
Well, I hate to think of how in bed the secret services are in political parties.
Absolutely. So we
media organisations.
Well, we know that, from, what is it, we look, the creator of Bond, he was a journalist and he was a spy. We had Arthur Ransom in Swallows and Amazons, journalist, spy. Both, actually, to be fair, he was a spy for the Bolsheviks and he was a spy for us as well. So we know that journalists and business people and people within political parties are pressurised in one way or another to spy on behalf of the police or the secret services. That you've got to get as a given. For some reason, they think it's essential that they do that. We can see what they're doing with the AFD. Personally, I don't understand. If they really believe in democracy, then they just let it happen. Do they really think Putin is the back of Nigel Farage going, hey man, I give you a part of Siberia if you win and then take us out of Ukraine war? Of course not. And that's why you get the stories, Farage is a Putinist, or anyone who criticises our vision in Ukraine or the idea that we want to go war, you're a Putinist. So, it just isn't, it doesn't pass the smell test. Most of these people aren't. They believe in their country, but they genuinely will be pursued.
And you need a threat there to keep Reform honest.
I think so.
Be a stalking horse.
Part of a stalking horse, but also the ability to give the movement something that they genuinely can believe in. That's what MAGA did. And
building the institutions.
Building the institutions, building
media,
the mechanism.
Music, arts.
Oh, God, I'd love to see
film.
some music events.
Well, you look at Angel Studios over in the States.
Yes.
They're making films. You've got, I believe they're bringing out television shows now.
Yeah.
You look at what Timcast is doing, building physical locations. You've got Public Square, which is their own version of Amazon now.
I didn't know that. Part of him is not even follow that line, but that's exactly what I'm thinking. I think we need to have our own ecosystem. and education on that, and the capability of being able to persuade it. I mean,
And
as I
get your
said,
kids out of the state schools so they're not brainwashed, which
Yeah.
they're attempting to abolish at the moment. Which that's I don't have children yet, but that would be a complete red line. It's like, no, my children are not going to the Hitler Youth, and if you wish to take them, then I will shoot you. It's as simple as.
yeah, I just don't understand them. I mean, I've never had a sit down with security services to explain the illogical mentality of why they want to pursue people in political parties, why they're so afraid of change, what really floats their boat when they decide that they want to infiltrate parties. I just don't get it. See, as a person who believes in freedom of speech, someone who believes in a democracy, I don't understand why these people say that we're the arbiters of it and what we say matters the most and what you say doesn't, and why we need to monitor you. And the only conclusion that you draw from that is that they're being paid very well. They've got a nice opportunity for those at the top to be given a grand job somewhere, a kind of think tank or a university membership of the House of Lords, and they all do that, and thanks very much. It's great, wonderful. I can now go on holiday with millions of pounds. John Major, gets £750,000 for just being ex-former Prime Minister? But they're the same. And if it's just all about that for themselves, pure aggrandizement financially, then that I can get. I'm doing it because I'm a brown noser.
And there's also a stick.
Yeah, well, there's always people who just like to bully, don't they? But I think I'd be intrigued. Not sure that I've ever met anyone, but maybe I have. Maybe I've had conversations with them, but I just don't get what I think is a schoolyard, pure, illogical element of understanding what democracy and freedom is.
But most people don't really think, do they?
Fair point.
I mean, look at the lockdowns. Look at the lockdowns.
Yeah.
How many people actually came out on the streets? Like, hundreds of thousands, millions, but nowhere near the amount of people who should. Like,
No.
mass formation psychosis. The entire country went completely far left, totalitarian socialist, and they were happy about it. They enjoyed it. They loved it.
Well, there is that. There's the psychology, behavioural psychology, that turns around and people just actually enjoy being controlled for a period of time. We saw that in the Soviet world, how even when the wall had come down, there were those in Eastern Europe that hankered back for the life of the security of the controlled element of the Soviet Union. So maybe, these people in our own security services are just best friends with the Stasi or whatever, that understand that language and understand that most people really will not come out and resist looking at your words. Resistance is not something most people want to do because, to be fair, most people just want to get on with their lives. They want to go to work, provide for their family, be able to have a little bit of a holiday every now and again, not feel as though they're actually starving, incapable of paying their bills. They want to just enjoy the elements of freedom of going for a walk or down to a pub. That's what most human beings want. And we should be trying to encourage a life where people can just feel comfortable in their skin and be able to enjoy all those aspects.
But that's not going to be possible if we're in a balkanised country where a quarter
Nope.
of the population are hostile to us.
Which
within 10 years, and where total economic collapse is on the cards, where you can't educate your own children, and there are gangs of people going around committing mass rape.
Which is why I point us down to the end of the Roman Empire and what happened afterwards, and why these people who are in charge are going, okay, we now recognise that's going to happen. So what's the best way of stopping it from happening at the moment? Oh, let's bully and brutalise and charge those people who don't want it to happen and do nothing to those that do want it to happen. And I find illogical. Is there a bigger, grander picture that they perceive for the billionaires that are growing across the world and the multi-millionaires, the 100 millionaires plus? Because I think, if you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million, you're not even in the club anymore. I remember that when working in banking. I worked for Credit Suisse, and I remember them saying, oh yeah, we used to take someone in with 1 million, and then it went to 5 million, then it's 10 million. Now we don't want anyone in private banking unless they got 100 million. You're not even in the club now unless you've got 100 million. And there's a lot of them in the world. So do they think that they're protecting this for those where you've got some of the big billionaires and millionaires all living in Dubai and Saudi Arabia who are able to capably put 163 billion in weapons? That's a different story. I think they're kind of gearing up for a war against Iran, and then Saudi Arabia is the main vehicle for that. But that's a different side issue. But you've got this big city they're building in the middle of the desert. You know, Elon Musk now going to use his boring capability to create swift trains backwards and forwards. This is the dystopian nightmare where all the rich and the wealthy are capable to go to these places. Well, we are left there in our shanty towns, scrabbling for a few biscuits or what's ever thrown out of the planes towards us.
And they can just sort of ascend, build their own civilization away from us.
Yep. So maybe that's what their plan is.
Hunger Games.
Yes. All the types of things that we're seeing. Maybe that's what they think is, as our Western society declines, what we need to do is protect those who have the biggest wealth. Let's find the route that we can do it, and we'll work on this for the next 20, 30 years. And maybe in the meantime we have a quick war just to keep everyone comfortable for a while. It keeps the rebels down. So Europe will take on Russia, America and Australia will take on China, and we'll leave Saudi Arabia to do. Sorry?
That would be their Goldstein, wouldn't it?
Yes.
You know, their, what was it, minute of rage or 3 minutes of rage?
Yeah.
And they can rage at him. He's the enemy.
Yeah, that's right. Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, you know, 1984, all of these coming to pass from books that were written 100 years ago.
Atlas Shrugged.
And all of them were the same Oxford types of individuals that understood it. The people who wrote the UN Convention were writing about that sort of thing. The people that wrote the background to the EU documentation and the founding documents all were of that belief. So maybe that's what they're planning. And this is just managing it. Some said managed decline. Maybe that's why they just want to do it. But I don't agree that we have to go that way. You see, we talked about, you know, being ill, challenging, difficult times. I look at the nation as we've grown here. It's not written in stone that this can be this way. A lot of our travails are population growth driven by immigration. If we're able to cease mass immigration at the numbers that we've got, yes, we're still going to have a pretty large population. Maybe we'll be able to deport those people who do not deserve to be here because either they're criminals or they fail to get proper asylum, which I estimate is about 350 to 500,000 people who have failed their asylum claims.
When you say deserve, though, I mean, no one actually deserves to be here except for British people. I mean, for everyone else, that's a privilege.
No, I agree. But let me put it in context. The undeserved are those in our current legislative process are those who've been claimed asylum and failed, or those who've come in here and not even claimed asylum, they're just illegal, of which we've got about 1 million, and maybe 1.2 actually. I think we're probably looking at that. You start removing them, and then you look at those who've come over here and say, right, that's a totally different scenario. We've already granted you indefinite right to remain. So you can either change the law and say, okay, we're now going to kick you all out as well, which some will agree with, some are not necessarily going to agree with. Others would turn around and say, okay, let's go to the next stage and get rid of all the criminals, which is perfectly fine as well. But
still going to be very small numbers in terms of prosecutions.
Yeah, but if you also stop people coming in, and then you implement other changes, like no family reunions, if people want to come and work here, what you would see within a very, very short period of time is a population decline of up to about 2 million, which is pretty useful, particularly in the cities, and no one coming in. And then as people die, the numbers of the country starts to decline. The next question you have to deal with, and I can see it cogitating in your mind, is you're going, well, Stephen, at the end of the day, we've still got 20% of the people who are not of our cultural liking or not in our cultural enjoyment, or maybe they don't blend in with us and they want this segmentation. I do accept that. Then you have to move on to the next stage of saying, this is our culture. And you give a choice. You either comply or you don't. So people given a choice. If you want to have, Sharia law, we're not going to have it. So that's the view. That's the government view. That's the people's view. So you can have a choice to either not accept that, which, and if you want to go, we can help you, or you accept it. You want to speak English, you accept it. So there are cultural things that you can do. And that's where you might finally start to get people understanding through integration. I don't think it'll happen overnight. And I just generally don't think it will happen at all, quite frankly.
But if with such a large population, you've got a critical mass. You've got a critical mass of people who've clustered together. And, you know, we can spend the next few decades sort of chasing after these people and trying to herd them into our customs. But fundamentally, they're not going to feel that because they're not descended from us. They've got no British blood. They're the children of migrants who've married other children of migrants who've married other children of migrants. There's no descendants there.
Yeah, but that could technically apply to an element of me. My grandmother was Irish. My grandfather was English. You know, I've got a black American, grandfather that produced my dad. I'm English. I was born here. I don't have thoroughbred King Alfred blood going through me. I have some of it, but I'm fervently a believer in this nation. So there are going to be people like me in this country who have this not perfect genetics, but a perfect belief in my nation.
But this isn't about genetics, you know. The descent. It's not about purity. It's about the fact that you actually have a line coming down to you. It's not, you know.
No, I get that.
Fundamentally,
I get that.
It doesn't matter if an Englishman marries, you know, a China woman, and they marry a French woman. Fundamentally, there's continuity there, and you have that continuity.
Yes, I
have that continuity.
Yeah.
Which goes back 10,000 years, the last ice age, when our ancestors first settled this land.
Yeah.
Those people aren't part of that chain. They're not part of our people, and they can marry into it. They can marry into the tribe, but.
I certainly get that. But look, I think, you know, if you look at the United States, that's a totally different scenario. You may want to turn around and say, look, the Huguenots weren't really part of us, and we had about 50,000 of them that came over, I don't know, 2 periods, 20, 30 years, not in the same level of numbers, but they were not thoroughbred Brits, but they married into it and took periods of time. So my argument is that, you know, there are clearly those that don't deserve to be here. Let's deal with those first. The illegal immigration, the criminals. And then there are going to be those who, for whatever particular reasons, do not want to blend into our nation. And we find a way that we either encourage them, as I say, to adopt our line, understand where we are. So you look at like Ben Habib, you know, his mum is English, you know, Pakistan dad, but he feels the line that you've talked about all the way through. I'm absolutely certain, I know there are, you know, Pakistanis who I know are friends who feel exactly English and will actually fight for the country. But equally, you know, that those who won't. And we could come on to a reason why lots of Brits won't fight for the country anymore as well. But my point is that the numbers are huge, but you can stop them. First and foremost, that's the control element. Then you remove those who don't deserve to be here. And I don't think there's anything that's in the United States, okay, they might have the right decision, but most people understand that we don't want people who are illegal or criminals here. Even Keir Starmer is talking about it, whether we believe he'll actually do it or not, but his press conference said as much. The next question is that phase that you're talking about is whether those who will not comply with our values, the genetic code, what do we do with those? My personal view is give them, let's build.
It's sort of tribal. It's marrying into the tribe, becoming one with the tribe, knowing that your kids are part of this culture because your wife is part of this culture or your husband is part of this culture, and you would die for them and they would die for their country.
Yeah, but I look at Maya Tusi, you know, come from Iran. He's not married anyone so far, but I would say that he is actually...
He's married now.
Is he married now? Okay, I didn't know. But when he first came here, when I first met him, is he married? Okay, well, sorry, Maya.
Mrs. Tusi, isn't it?
He's engaged.
Right, he's engaged.
Okay, well, good for him because, I mean, so there's Maya who's come over and he completely gets it in terms of the country. I'm saying that there are people like that, and we know that there aren't. So I think we can't be as dogmatic about it. I think we can say that this is our culture, this is our country, and we should be defending the freedom of speech. We shouldn't be in control in schools. The kind of legislative process began, as I said, quite rightly with the Racial Relations Act and a principle, but then we've extended it otherwise. So you're here, love the country, Love what we stand for. Love for our history. Love for our flags. Don't pull our statutes down. It's what built us. It's what you came to kind of enjoy. And I've never been one that's very comfortable in taking the idea that we just abuse people for the sake of abusing them because they're just not like us.
Oh, no. What?
And I'm not saying that you are on this. I'm not. But there are those who look at this argument and say, let's just deport them for the sake of deporting them. I don't. I've said at the beginning, we must always care and look for humanity and find the best solutions. We have a great country. And that's why I'm being very positive about it. Why I think it's not the end. Why I think we can actually achieve something. Hard it will be. And I'm not going to go down the lines of the elites who think this is the end of the world and we can't be achieved and let's put positive things in. But I do look at human beings in a generally fundamentally good way. I don't think most people are bad, whatever culture or creed you are. I don't think most people are bad. I do think some people are evil. And I think some people are bad. And I think people take advantage. But on the whole, I try to have a positive aspect about humanity. And I want to create a country that respects who we are and where we've come from, respects the way that we want to look forward. If you come here, you join your clan, in your words, but you do so in a respectful way. You like what we do, and we like you because of that. And if you don't, you rape children, off you go. We're not having you. If you're part of that supportive network that do that, off you go. I don't want you, because that's not who we are and that's not what we want. If you're part of a gang that's turning your houses in local council estates into marijuana farms and using the funding of that to bring in people for girls as sexual slaves, and then using that money to become doormen on gangs that you can brutalise people going into nightclubs, as I see up and down the north of England. And then we'll open up lots of barbershops so we can launder our money. And 1 in 10 of us, of our culture, are actually in prison, connected to crime. You're not one of us, go. But that's basic law, basically dealing with our fundamental principles. And we're not destroying who we are. And I don't want to go down the line where we destroy who we are just because they're attempting to do it to us.
Well, what I wanted to ask was essentially twofold. First, I wanted to ask, what do you think about Powell's plan of incentivising people and facilitating people to leave? So it would be some sort of figure, maybe 5,000 for residency, 10,000 for citizenship. If people had citizenship somewhere else, buy them their plane ticket and transfer them the money when they leave. And then essentially anyone who doesn't have loyalty to the country would just go. And that would essentially, it's a test.
Well,
it's a test. Is this country worth more to you than money?
Yeah, and I like that. In the United States are dealing with that, and in European countries they've actually considered it as well. The discussions about it. There's nothing wrong with and we do it today on what people like to use the phrase deportations, but actually it's removals. And the phrase removals, we offer people money to go back to their own countries. So if we wanted to offer that as a greater opportunity for people to say, I'm fed up of living here, I don't want to, and I'll go back, I don't see any harm in doing that. Because it's actually a joint decision. We're giving you the opportunity to say, you lived here, you didn't want to comply with us, or you just didn't want to be here, we'll let you go home. Fundamentally, though, that needs to be tied into a much more comprehensive and stricter visa system in which you tie in your rights to come to this country at certain criteria. We talk about 10 years before you're allowed to have indefinite right to remain. I mean, I'm perfectly okay with that. If you are contributing and you're honest and you're decent and you believe in us, then yes. Like my friend who's Polish. He was here and his wife is Haitian. Fantastic couple, brilliant. I mean, you've got to look at the size of him. He's about 6'3", built like a proverbial tank, and she's the diminutive black Haitian who's about this big. So the height,
large.
Oh, absolutely fantastic, hilarious couple, both fervently on our side of the argument. And they met in Canada, lived in Canada. I won't give much more of their story, but he came here as a Pole who got Canadian citizenship. and loved it here, and he took 5 years to do all the exams and everything to become a British citizen. And he campaigns for exactly what we do, which is to have Britain as the country he believes in. Freedom of speech, democracy, and all the rest of it. Because he believed it so much, he changed his own nationality because he wanted to be part of this nation. And there will be people who genuinely are like him. And I'm happy about that. If you're not, and you saw Britain just as a transaction, as a financial transaction to get a house or get a job, and look, there are lots of bankers who do that, trust me, there are lots of footballers that do that, lots of singers and dancers and artists who just like the idea of making a lot of money in Britain, and business people, then mate, you don't deserve the right to a passport and a visa in the same way.
Well, that's where I had the second part of my question. I wanted to ask you about whether visas should be determined by some sort of government board, because this essentially seems like it's still socialism, still some sort of bureaucrat sitting at a desk going, we need X, Y, and Z, and this criteria and that criteria.
True.
Should we not simply have a basic check to see if there's some sort of criminal, and then beyond that?
Well, that actually does. I mean, if you want to get most of your visas, there is basic checks that you do.
Plus, then auction the visas and allow the free market to determine who is best aside from that. Obviously, we may have some preferential treatment for people from the Anglosphere.
I'm not necessarily I would work along the auctioning of our visas out, because, quite frankly, there's lots of people who have lots of money that might want to get a visa that I wouldn't want necessarily in this country, being able to buy it in. I think if you're going down the line that we want to have our cultural values protected, our historical freedoms of speech, you want to be able to have a system that can wheedle out those who just generally don't agree. And I think a visa system needs to have an assessment process in there. I also unfortunately recognise that if you look across the globe, there are people who travel in and out of countries, some for short periods of time, some for work. And so a proper migration advisory committee would have more consistent policies looking at the needs across different areas. I mean, there's no doubt that if we had like Ronaldo coming over to Manchester United, there's no way he's going to take away his Portuguese nationality. But he's not even going to really support Britain in terms of you fighting for us at all. We recognise that. There might be the surgeons, the doctors, the musicians, whatever. Some of those that we regard as truly highly skilled. And we need to be able to assess where we can bring those people in. And that assessment is to turn around and go, do we bring Ronaldo in, knowing full well that he probably won't stand for us if we went for a war. He'd fly back in his private jet as quickly as he can. But is it what we want as a country to have an active football team? And so the auctioning off might be that he can come in and say, him and his agents in Man United, I'll give you 50 million for a visa for Ronaldo. But we might have somebody who is a genuinely decent individual who's an academic or a scientist or something like that. And we might want them. They couldn't afford it. So I suspect that it shouldn't just always be based on money. I think we need to have some criteria. The criteria needs to be probably a lot more definable. Cultural aspects need to be in there. The criminal checks are very, very important. Maybe they're opaque at the moment and people don't really see what we're doing. And my main point about it, though, is I don't think we can encourage a visa system that enables people to have almost short-term permanent right to remain. Well, that's the problem. We're giving it after 3 years if you're a student. You know, you come here as a student, then you transfer onto a visa, and then you get the permanent right to remain. No, it should be an honour, like I said about my Polish son. This should be something you strive for. You must say, I love this country so much, I want to have a passport. I want to become a member of this nation. So you can work here. I'm perfectly okay to turn around and say, for example, one of the areas that we looked at, if you look at Dubai or other countries, they bring in nurses and doctors and they pay them very well. They just can't become citizens. And after 3 years, you've got to go.
That sounds like a much better plan. Although, what I would say is I do think it would change the attitudes towards migration if people knew that just about everyone, apart from people who are marrying in, etc., who come from other countries, apart from that, that just about every migrant who's coming here was actually paying for the privilege of being here. And they would feel a lot more gratitude towards the migrants. No, they paid for that pothole. They paid for our armed forces. They paid for the courts to actually run.
And that is what I've always believed in. That is what was in my paper, the Centre for Migration's Economic Prosperity's phraseology, economic prosperity. It's about the idea that human beings are pretty decent wherever we are, on the whole, as I said, with the caveats that we've got. And if we are able to get a really positive immigration system and policies and procedures, and people honestly believe that we're controlling the illegal migration, dealing with the criminals, then the vast majority of people are perfectly happy to have people working next to them and not feeling that they're taking advantage of it. And I want that, because it doesn't matter what country we are generally, not always exceptions, but most human beings rub along with each other and there's particular reasons. And that is what we want. We want to have a conversation, a culture where we're all inclusive and working together. And there is none of these divisions, none of this fear, none of the kind of ideology that you're trying to take over. And that is what might sound as though I'm suddenly an uber lefty, or maybe I'm being too Catholic, but it's just about looking at human beings and saying that we're pretty good, to get on with each other, and we can just respect our country, respect our history, have politicians that understand the importance of that, create rules and regulations that enable the public to be able to integrate and work with each other and see the benefit of all of this together. I want that. Wouldn't anybody? Wouldn't we want a conducive, lovely nation where occasionally we recognise there's going to be some lunatic who wants to try and stab children, but then we deal with him rapidly. But there wouldn't be the riots around there if we'd done this in the first place.
Yeah. So it's not just the Centre for Migration, it's also economic prosperity.
Yes.
You've done all of these statistics.
Yes.
I want to know, what is the cost of each migrant coming in? Because we've been told for a very long time that they're net contributors and net benefit. And obviously everyone knows this is a lie. So how much are migrants costing, and what's going to be the change to people's pockets if we do close the borders? Right.
Okay. So let's look at some of the base numbers. In terms of asylum, 1.2 million since the year 2000. And if you look at the cost of an individual that's coming across on a boat, I made an assessment. It's roughly around £50,000 per channel migrant in their first year. It actually goes up in their second year. So if you look at 50,000 coming over this year, it's 50,000 times 50,000. It's 2.5 billion just for those who've arrived this year. Then we had those last year and the year before. I'm going to have to revise that, because my estimates were based on an immigration cost to us of around 8 to 10 billion a year on housing. We now know from the National Audit Office, even when people were laughing at me saying you're over-egging the pudding, the National Audit Office saying it's costing us £15 billion a year just on housing those in asylum. So that's dealing with that each year. But then you've got to look at the next stage, which is really where I would love to get my teeth into in terms of getting funding and research to do this, because the great con is what's the next stage of the cost to us. Every time that you grant someone indefinite right to remain, you cease to be part of that £15 budget for the Home Office. Where do you go? If you're a failed asylum seeker or you've been granted indefinite right to remain, you now become the responsibility of the council you're in. You now start to take services if you don't have a job. You now can claim benefits if you've got that. You can get housing benefit, no council tax. And if you're someone who's a failed asylum applicant, we still have to give you that plus a little bit of extra money. All of that is a cost to the taxpayer, but not through national tax, through your council tax. And that, I think, is the bigger number. Because don't forget, the vast majority of people are then shifted from Home Office and hotels and camps into housing estates across the country. And I would put that estimate somewhere around 30 30 billion.
So that's another 30 billion. So it's
On top
50
of that,
billion.
I would put the overall cost of courts, translators, oral and I, border force, home office, housing, council tax, going into the local community, hospitals, schools, all of that in somewhere in the region of £50 billion is costing us as a nation. Now some of that, I'm going to admit, is going to be deducted by the fact that people in the communities who are indefinite right to remain are spending money. They are going into shops. So there is an offset and tax coming with that. And that's what the Migration Advisory Committee has overemphasised on this recent data with Mr. Khan, where Khan, our so-called economics maestro, has said that skilled migrants and their families contribute £16,000 a year, and we, a British family, are a net taker at 4,000. So you've got this 20,000 difference. Well, if people go to CMAP or my own personal site, I break it down to show how that is a lie. First of all, and I've written to the mayor, I've said, look, the Migration Advisory Committee report in December 2024 does state that skilled workers and their families contribute 16,000. I don't necessarily agree with their analysis of it, but they do say that. The number that you're saying, the 4,000, is not like for like. Surprise, surprise, the Migration Advisory Committee doesn't say skilled UK family and their dependents. It says all UK workers, including pensioners. Including pensioners.
So that's how they come up with the lie.
That's how they come back with the 4,000. So I break down the kind of economic scam and all the rest of it. So if you look online, you'll see how I've broken it down in terms of that. So that's first and foremost. It includes everybody. And it also says that, children, young men come here and they don't go hospital as much. Well, look at the fact that you've already have the OBR says that, if these people last for a long time, they will cost us £1 million each if they live to 80. One of the other scams that they did is they only look at those people who are skilled workers at that point in time, as of today. But the numbers for all the UK citizens, the workers, is forever, from the time into they're a pensioner. So we're taking out and taking out and taking out. So they're not turning around and going, a skilled worker who's an equivalent actually is the skilled worker the UK is equivalent today.
So do you think they had Professor Neil Ferguson doing the stats on
No,
this
what's deeply surprising is they've got people like Madeleine Sumption, who's from the Oxford Migration, who's really clever, really smart. And I don't know whether it's the other ones on there. I don't really know them too well. But I just don't understand why they got this analysis and how they managed to use this kind of model that they used to call a static model that they wanted to use. Because there are other problems with it. They turn around and say, for example, that national debt is all a cost to UK workers, but none of it is a proportion of UK skilled workers because they weren't here when the national debt was accrued. I mean, that is nonsense, to be honest, really. So you've got all these people. So the numbers that you look up there, I don't think it proves. We have research in Holland that shows that, and in Denmark, that shows mass migration, unskilled migration, including here in the OBR, is very definitely a massive cost to the UK, to their government, that they do claim a lot of benefits, that they're not contributing in terms of taxation. The other interesting point about Khan's argument is there's 372,000 skilled workers' visas, including their families. The actual skilled workers were 172,300. Yet they contributed, on an average for all of them, 12,500 in tax. Well, actually, if you looked at just the only people earning the tax, because the Migration Advisory Committee says, with the workers, that meant the average salary was £82,500. Then it goes, who are the skilled workers? And it breaks them down. Chefs. Care home workers. Which care home worker do you know earns £82,500?
None.
Which chef do you know that earns £82,500? Although I know a couple of pubs in Winchester that are paying them 50. But there you go, that's a different issue.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, it is. And so you look at that and you go, it doesn't make any logical sense. What are you doing? Turning around and saying, well, again, I use Ronaldo because I've probably forgotten most of the major footballers playing for clubs nowadays. Don't kill me for that. But, you've got a footballer, you've got a banker. He's earning 2 or 3 million a year. A footballer's case, a hell of a lot more. They're paying a lot more tax. You take out that skilled worker. What if you just removed those and left all the rest? What's their contribution?
So you've talked about the costs to the government.
Yes.
You haven't talked about the cost in terms of depressed wages or an increase in house prices and congestion.
Yeah.
Because these things are the more tricky things to be calculated.
Yes. So what you've got is plenty of research, even from some of the people like Dustman and Fratman, which are kind of the gods of government's kind of research that even the Migration Advisory Committee dealt with in this recent report. Even they make claims and recognisable claims that large-scale migration does depress wages of the lowest earners in the country.
Obviously.
So we know that, it's a fact. So that isn't there. And they try and calculate that, and they always turn around and say it's somewhere in like 0.5% of GDP, something very minimal. The big cost, which I think people are beginning to see in reality, is that of housing and accommodation. I think that's the biggest issue now. That's the driving wedge for this, is because as you've got companies like Serco, Mere Homes and Clear Homes who are just going out to landlords across the country and saying, give me your house for 5 years, I'll pay you more than the market rent, I'll pay your council tax and all your repairs, let me put an asylum seeker in there. And as they go, suddenly the housing stock for rented accommodation for the average family is gone. What's left increases rent, because the housing stock is lower. If you're putting 1 million or 700,000 in last year and you're only building 300,000 houses, and the 300,000 houses are concentrated in certain areas of the country, you're building less houses than the population is growing.
Few.
If you're then taking away what's left of that housing stock to fill people who have got indefinite right to remain or asylum seekers, rents are going to rise. People can no longer find accommodation and housing, which is why it's crucial that we deal with the numbers coming in, why we need to reduce population. We have to reduce population. If we don't reduce population, we won't, even if we carry on building 300,000 a year or 1 million that the Labour Party wants to do, it won't decrease housing costs at all. And we know that. I've spoken to property developers. There you go. We're still going to be making our 30%. Our house prices will not fall. One major, I remember a conversation I had years and years ago with chief operating officer of a major FTSE property building company. And I said to you, how are we going to reduce housing costs for new houses? And he says it's impossible whilst we've got the population coming in. And I said, why? He said, well, it is possible to do it. He said, what? We probably need to build 1 million houses and flats a year in London for 5 years. If you can put 5 million in there, because that's where most people earn the biggest amount of money, they can't afford to buy the houses in London. The only way that you can suppress house prices dramatically is you build 5 million in 5 years in London, and suddenly house prices collapse because there's 5 million more.
Right, but they'd all turn into slums, and then you've got the congestion element.
Yeah, there is. I'm just saying. So he's taking pure numbers, and if you did that, then they wouldn't start going off to Watford and Brighton, because now they can afford to get their £100,000 a year buys them a £400,000 flat in London instead of 1 million, because we've got so many. When you take out the numbers, they're not commuting into Brighton. That means suddenly those houses become free. The local communities who don't earn 100,000 a year suddenly can afford the houses in their area. He says, but you wouldn't need to bring in about 250,000 new people to help build it, and you'd have to have ferries and ships with all the materials consistently around Britain all the time permanently. Only solution to housing cost drops in this country is not building more houses. That is for those think tanks and people who are being funded by organisations that support this as an ideology. The only way to reduce housing is to reduce the population here. Carry on building 300,000 for the next 10 years, you get 3 million. But if you have no one coming into the country in 3 years, that's 3 million suddenly becomes 3 million houses with no person coming in. QED logic. People will die. People will move away. But you've got 3 million extra stock and the population of the country has declined. Part of the reason why they don't want that, why do they not want housing to collapse?
Because that's where their assets are, because
Absolutely.
they've rigged the financial system with fiat currency.
And it would impact our bonds, and it would impact our GDP, and the Treasury would have a fit, because suddenly if house prices collapsed, we'd have a mortgage crash just like we had in 2008. And suddenly people have taken out a mortgage for £3 million to be able to buy some sort of house that in the middle of London that's got, 2 sheds and a couple of a dog's house in it, because that's literally the cost of housing in London now is so ridiculous. They've taken out a mortgage on that and they've suddenly found that house is worth like 50p. They're going to be so many millions in debt. I'm being a bit sarcastic in terms of numbers.
Maybe this is an answer to your question originally as to why people are so fervently voting Lib Dem.
Yes. Well, I've no doubt that they are battening down their hatches and protecting their areas, because the house prices are the only things that is preventing people being able to enter their communities, and they're comfortable. But I will tell you one thing, I think this Labour government wants to open up the housing in all the villages and towns across this country, and that's when they will, and they've done it in such a way that you'll have no complaints, and they will start to see what it's like. I look at Winchester. I've seen a housing estate developed as you're going into Winchester with nearly 5,000 houses, and it keeps growing. It's literally 20-25% increase in 10 years of the city.
Wow.
And we have congestion. No Sherlock. Really? And you think nothing's going to happen? So if it's happening in towns and villages like that across the southeast, even these areas where you see the Lib Dems, they're going to see more and more housing estates being built, and it's all the way from from my area right down to Southampton. I just see housing estate after housing estate being built on beautiful farmland. Add that to the desire of putting wind farms and solar panels on. Our green and pleasant land. We should be turning in our graves. What we're doing is a generally beautiful land.
No, you saw the Labour poster "Change Britain." It had the countryside on it, and you see they probably want to bulldoze it.
Yeah, I'm afraid they do. Anyway, there we go.
So, you obviously need to get more figures for house prices. You need
Yes.
to look more into wages.
Yes.
You need funding.
Yeah, I do.
I was wondering, where can people find you? Because you're now on the Lotus Eaters, which has
Yep.
been fantastic. I've seen you on there.
Yeah, I'm on Lotus Eaters. If you want to just at the moment follow me just on Twitter, CMEPUK1. That's for the migration element, and Steven Woolfe 1 for Twitter, or X as it is, at the moment. And then what I'm going to do is, my strategic plan is I want to bring out all the documents that I've done in the past, start putting them onto CMET to show people the quality of the work that's there, and that will start happening in the next month. And then when that happens, I'm going to list some of the key areas that I think need to be looked at. I'm going to ask people to kind of vote on 1 or 2, and then I'm going to do a kind of crowdfund and say, look, if that's what you want, this is what it'll cost for each individual project. So yes, I will want money, but not instantly. I want people to see the work done first. I'm one of these great believers that you have to produce for people to see that it works.
Proof of the pudding's in the eating.
Absolutely. And you're not just giving it just for the sake of giving it. I want them to know that there's real work behind it, and when you put money in there, it's actually going to proper reasons for doing so.
And these are the statistics that are going to shred the Uniparty.
Yes, that's it. I mean, you just need to... If everybody was able to get their hands on the fact that, Khan was wrong because he's looking at skilled workers and then comparing it to all workers, that in alone is enough to turn around and say, I'm sorry, you're wrong. It's that little things, or simple numbers. 1.2 million asylum seekers cost 50,000. So I'm also working on these kind of blocks of figures, nice colours, just with a number there and a figure. So if you're sat there in a coffee shop, if you're in a conversation with people, if you want to retweet, you've got the figures and, more importantly, with the research underneath it.
Citation.
Yeah, the citation. So no one can go for you. Produce the numbers, do it factually. It's hard to deal with facts. They may not like it, but facts are facts.
Well, I hear they're far right.
I find it weird that we're regarded as far right, because if anyone reads the works of Kennedy, both Kennedys, in the 60s, much of what we say today is written by what they said. And so I find it incredible to think just caring about human beings, wanting us all to live along well, trying to put in proper structures that we can all live together and accept us for ourselves, but loving our country, its institutions, the construction of our history, all of that is regarded as far right and not a kind of common sense or a general love for humanity and our people. I just don't understand it. And I don't understand why the left or anyone else wants to say that we're being divisive and awful and evil. I just don't see the logic. We're actually the opposite.
The compassionate people.
We're trying to find the compassion in the proper way, but being respectful at the same time. And that's my general view. Be compassionate, be respectful, be kind, but actually understand this country is a great country to be in.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much.
My
for
pleasure.
joining us.
Lovely. Okay, thank you ever so much.
For more exclusive behind-the-scenes content, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon. It really helps us cover the cost of any live streams, events, protests, or anything that we do. You'll also be seeing any behind-the-scenes footage and anything that we might be doing with Defiance Records.
Resistance GB's new series, 1,000 Words, has me, portrait artist Jake Fern, talking to some of the key figures in the movement. Half my brain concentrating on having a conversation, and the other half on making a painting. Do I succeed at either? You be the judge.